You're not our daughter anymore. You're just a stain on this family's name. My father didn't look at me when he said it. He kept his eyes fixed on the winding, snow-covered road ahead. My mother sat in the passenger seat, staring straight forward, her lips pressed into a thin, hard line. The silence in the car was heavier than the blizzard howling outside. I was 16 years old, 4 months pregnant, and shivering, despite the heater being on full blast. I thought we were going to my aunt's house to cool off after the screaming match we had earlier that morning. I thought, despite the names they called me, the embarrassment, the mistake, they still loved me. I was wrong. Love has a freezing point, and we had just hit it. "Dad, please," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I'm scared." "You should have thought about that before you threw your life away," he snapped. Suddenly, the car slowed down. We were on a high mountain pass, miles from the nearest town. The thermometer on the dashboard read -20 degrees Celsius. He pulled over onto the narrow shoulder. "Get out," he said. "What?" I felt my heart drop into my stomach. "It's a lesson," my mother finally spoke, her voice ice cold. "Consider it a prank. A little reality check to see how grown up you really are. Get out, walk for a bit, and maybe you'll realize how much you need us." I thought they were joking. I really did. I stepped out into the biting wind, my thin jacket offering no protection. The moment my boots hit the crunching snow, the door slammed. Before I could even grab the handle, the tires spun, kicking slush onto my jeans, and the red taillights vanished into the white fog of the storm. I stood there, alone in the darkness. No phone, no money, just the sound of the wind and the life kicking inside me. I started walking, my breath coming out in ragged puffs of steam. Every step felt like needles were being driven into my feet. I didn't know then that this was the night my old self died. I didn't know that 10 years later, I would walk back into their lives with a single document that would strip away everything they ever valued. But as I felt the frostbite beginning to creep up my fingers, a pair of headlights appeared in the distance. A stranger was coming, and little did my parents know that stranger was about to give me the keys to their destruction. Before I tell you who was in that car and the terrifying secret I discovered about my parents that night, I need to know, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments below. If you've ever been underestimated or betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you, hit that like button and subscribe. It helps me tell more stories. The headlights were blinding. For a second, I hoped it was my parents coming back, that they had laughed, shared a high five over their prank, and realized that leaving a pregnant teenager on a mountain in a blizzard was a bridge too far. But as the vehicle slowed, I saw it wasn't their sedan. It was a rusted, heavy-duty pickup truck. The window rolled down, and a blast of warm air hit my frozen face. An older man, maybe in his 60s, peered out at me. He had a thick beard dusted with frost and eyes that looked like they had seen 1,000 storms just like this one. "Kid," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You looking to die, or are you just lost?" "My parents." I couldn't even finish the sentence. My jaw was locked from the cold. I just pointed down the empty road where the red taillights had long since faded. He didn't ask questions. He didn't lecture me. He just reached over and opened the passenger door. "Get in, before the mountain takes you." His name was Silas. As the heater thawed my frozen skin, the pain was excruciating, a pins and needles sensation that made me want to scream. Silas handed me a thermos of coffee that tasted like charcoal, but it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever felt. He listened in silence as I told him about the pregnancy, the stain on the family name, and the prank that felt a lot more like an attempted murder. "They said I'm an embarrassment," I whispered, looking at my blue-tinged fingernails. "They said I'd never be anything without them." Silas gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "People who use their power to crush the weak aren't powerful, girl. They're just bullies with better clothes. You want to stay a victim, or you want to grow some teeth?" That night, Silas didn't take me to a police station or a shelter. He took me to his workshop at the base of the mountain. He was a master watchmaker, a man who dealt in the tiny, invisible gears that make the world move. He told me I could stay in the guest room under one condition. I had to work. I had to learn. "The world sees a pregnant girl," Silas said, pointing to a disassembled gold pocket watch on his desk. "But you need to see yourself like this watch. Even when you're broken into 100 pieces, if you know where the gears go, you can keep time better than anyone else." While I lived with Silas, I started realizing things weren't as they seemed back home. I found my old backpack in the trunk of his truck. My parents had tossed it out a mile down the road. Inside, tucked into a hidden pocket of my journal, was a letter I'd never seen before. It was from my grandmother, who had passed away a month before I got pregnant. The letter wasn't just a goodbye. It was a warning. "My dearest granddaughter," it read, "they will try to break you to get what I've left you. Do not trust their smiles, and certainly do not trust their poverty. They are vultures in designer suits." My parents had always complained about money. They told me we were struggling because of my medical needs. But as I sat in Silas's workshop, reading my grandmother's shaky handwriting, I realized they hadn't just abandoned me because they were ashamed. They had abandoned me because as long as I was missing or unfit, they had access to a trust fund I didn't even know existed. The pregnancy wasn't the reason they hated me. I was simply an obstacle to their bank account. I looked at Silas, who was meticulously cleaning a tiny sapphire bearing. My tears dried up instantly. A cold, hard knot formed in my chest. I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to learn how to dismantle their lives with the same precision Silas used on those watches. "Silas," I said, my voice steady for the first time in months. "Teach me everything, not just about watches. Teach me how to be someone they'll be afraid of." He looked up, a small, grim smile touching his lips. "Now, you're talking. But remember, the best revenge isn't loud. It's a silent gear that turns until the whole machine falls apart." I spent the next few years in the shadows. I had my daughter, a beautiful, fierce little girl I named Noah. While my parents probably told the world I ran away or worse, I was becoming a ghost with a very specific set of skills and a growing pile of evidence. But I needed a secret advantage, something they would never see coming, and that's when I discovered what my father had been hiding in those business trips he took every month. For 3 years, I lived in a world of ticking clocks and whispered secrets. Silas wasn't just a watchmaker. He was a man who knew how to listen to the rhythm of the world. He taught me that everyone has a heartbeat, a tempo, and a weakness. "Your father," Silas said one evening, sliding a magnifying loupe away from his eye. "He's a man of habit. Habit is just another word for a trail of breadcrumbs." While I raised Noah in the quiet safety of the mountains, I used the skills Silas taught me to dig. I wasn't just a scared teenager anymore. I was a researcher. I was a hunter. Using a burner laptop and the basic coding Silas's son had taught me during his summer visits, I began to peel back the layers of my parents' struggling lives. The first thing I found was a shell company. It was registered under a name so boring you'd miss it if you weren't looking. Blue Mountain Holdings. My father had told the neighbors and the local church that I'd run away with a troubled boy and that the grief had nearly bankrupted them. They played the role of the grieving, humiliated parents perfectly. They even held a small remembrance service for me when I turned 18, acting as if I were dead to the world. But Blue Mountain Holdings wasn't grieving. It was thriving. I discovered that my grandmother hadn't just left me a trust fund. She had left me the mineral rights to the very mountain where they had abandoned me. Those jagged cliffs were sitting on a massive vein of rare earth minerals. My parents knew this. They knew that as long as I was alive and present, I was the sole executor of those rights. But if I disappeared, if I was declared legally dead or voluntarily absent for a period of 7 years, the rights would revert to them as my next of kin. That prank on the highway wasn't a lesson. It was an eviction notice from life itself. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted me to freeze so they could sign the contracts with the mining conglomerates. "They're selling the ground you nearly died on," Silas whispered when I showed him the documents I'd pulled from the deep web. "They think I'm a ghost, Silas?" I said, my voice cold and sharp like a needle. "And ghosts have a way of haunting people when they least expect it." I spent the next 4 years working 3 jobs while Silas watched Noah. I wasn't just saving money, I was building a new identity. I moved to the city, changed my hair, changed my style, and used my grandmother's maiden name. I enrolled in business school, specializing in corporate law and mineral rights. I needed to understand the language of the people who wanted to rob me. Every time I felt tired, every time Noah asked why she didn't have a grandma or grandpa, I remembered the smell of the car exhaust and the sight of those red taillights disappearing into the snow. I remembered the -20 degrees Celsius air burning my lungs. By the time Noah turned 5, I was no longer the girl in the thin jacket. I was a consultant for the very firm my father was trying to sell the mountain to. I became the invisible hand behind the scenes, guiding the negotiations. I made sure the contracts were incredibly specific. I made sure every legal loophole was tied into a noose that only I held the end of. My father thought he was dealing with a faceless corporation. He didn't realize he was sitting across the table from the stain he had tried to wash away. One afternoon, I sat in my high-rise office, looking at a photo of my parents from a recent charity gala. They looked radiant, wealthy. My mother was wearing a diamond necklace that probably cost more than the car they'd left me in. I picked up a pen and signed a document that would initiate the final phase of the acquisition. The trap was set. They were about to receive an invitation to a meeting that would change their lives and end their reign of lies. "It's time, isn't it?" Silas asked over the phone that night. He sounded proud, but worried. "The clock is winding down, Silas," I replied, "and I'm the only one who knows how to stop it." But just as I was preparing my final move, I received an anonymous email. It contained a photo of Noah playing in the park. No text, just the image. My heart stopped. Someone knew I was alive. Someone knew about my daughter. And they were watching. I realized then that my parents weren't the only ones playing a game. There was a third player in the shadows, and they were about to force my hand before I was ready. My blood turned to ice. I stared at the photo of Noah on my screen, her small hands covered in sand, a gap-toothed grin on her face. It was taken from behind a bush at the park we visited every Tuesday. The message was clear. I wasn't the only one hunting. I didn't panic. Silas had taught me that panic is just wasted energy that could be used for a countermove. I closed my laptop, walked to the window, and looked down at the city lights. Someone was trying to rattle me. They wanted me to make a mistake, to run, or to reveal my hand too early. I spent the next 48 hours in a state of hypervigilance. I moved Noah to a secure location, Silas's old cabin, deep in the woods where the roads weren't even on Google Maps. "Stay with Silas, baby," I whispered, kissing her forehead. "Mommy has to go finish a story." "Is it a happy story?" she asked, her eyes wide. "For us?" "Yes," I promised. "For the villains?" "Not so much." I returned to the city and began backtracing the email. It didn't lead to my parents. They weren't tech-savvy enough for encrypted relays. It led to a law firm, Vanguard and Associates. My heart hammered against my ribs. That was the firm representing the mining conglomerate. Someone inside the very company I was consulting for had figured out who I was. I arranged a meeting with the lead partner, a man who smelled of expensive tobacco and old money. I walked into his office, not as a nervous assistant, but as the woman who held the keys to the mountain. I didn't wait for him to speak. I tossed my grandmother's original land deed onto his mahogany desk. "You've been watching my daughter," I said, my voice a low, dangerous hum. "That was your first and last mistake." He didn't flinch. He just leaned back and smiled. "We knew the missing heir would eventually crawl out of the woodwork. We just didn't expect you to be so competent. Your parents told us you were a drug-addled runaway who died years ago. They've been trying to sell us rights they don't legally own yet." "I know," I said. "They're waiting for the 7-year mark to declare me dead. They have 3 months left." "So, what's your price?" he asked. "You want to screw them over? We can help you do that. We can bypass them entirely, pay you directly, and leave them with the debt of the shell companies they've built." It was a tempting offer. It was the easy way out. I could take the millions, disappear with Noah, and never look back. But as I looked at the deed, I remembered the cold. I remembered the way my father's eyes didn't even flicker with regret as he drove away. Easy wasn't enough. I didn't just want the money. I wanted them to feel the exact moment the ground vanished beneath their feet. I wanted the public to see the charitable pillars of the community for the monsters they truly were. "I don't want your payout," I told the lawyer. "I want you to proceed with the meeting. Invite my parents. Tell them the final acquisition is ready for signing. Tell them the silent partner is coming to witness the handover." "And what do you get out of this?" he asked, genuinely confused. "I get to be the ghost that finally speaks," I replied. I spent the next week preparing. I didn't just gather legal documents. I gathered records of every charity donation they'd faked, every lie they'd told the neighbors, and the police report I'd filed anonymously years ago that they had managed to suppress. I also found something else, a secret bank account my mother had kept hidden from my father. It seemed the happy couple was just as busy betraying each other as they were betraying me. She had been siphoning money from the trust fund for years, preparing to leave him the moment the mining deal closed. The layers of rot in my family were deeper than I ever imagined. They weren't just evil, they were pathetic. The night before the meeting, I sat in a dark room, lit only by the glow of my monitors. I practiced my walk. I practiced my smile. I wore a suit that cost more than their car. I wasn't 16 anymore. I wasn't an embarrassment. The invitation was gold embossed. It looked like a ticket to heaven. But for my parents, it was a summons to the end of the world. They were hosting a pre-acquisition gala at their sprawling estate, the one they bought with the first loan they took against my inheritance. I stood across the street in the shadows, watching the parade of luxury cars pull up to the driveway. I saw them. My father was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, laughing with a local senator. My mother was draped in silk, playing the part of the grieving mother who had finally found peace through philanthropy. They looked so comfortable, so safe. They had spent 10 years building a fortress out of my disappearance. "Are you ready?" Silas's voice crackled in my earpiece. He was parked a block away, monitoring the digital feeds I'd planted inside the house. "I've been ready for a decade, Silas," I whispered. I didn't walk through the front door. I didn't want to be seen yet. I entered through the service entrance, wearing a caterer's uniform I'd intercepted. I moved through the kitchen, past the towers of shrimp cocktail and the flowing champagne. No one looked at the help. To people like my parents, the staff are just furniture that breathes. I made my way to my father's private study. It was filled with trophies and leather-bound books he'd never read. I placed a small black device behind his desk lamp, a signal jammer that would go live in exactly 60 minutes. Then, I left a single, folded piece of paper on his chair. Inside the paper was a photograph, not a new one. It was a grainy Polaroid from 10 years ago, the one taken of me the day I found out I was pregnant. I had written 3 words on the back. "The mountain remembers." I slipped back out and changed into my real armor, a sharp, white power suit that made me look like an angel of vengeance. I stepped into the ballroom just as my father was taking the stage to make a speech. "Friends, colleagues," he began, his voice booming with false sincerity. "Tonight is not just about a business deal. It's about a legacy. After the tragic loss of our daughter years ago, my wife and I dedicated ourselves to turning pain into progress. This mountain project will bring jobs, wealth, and hope to our community." The room erupted in applause. My mother wiped a fake tear from her eye. I stood at the back of the room, sipping a glass of water, watching the scene. I waited for the exact moment his eyes scanned the crowd. When they finally met mine, he didn't recognize me at first. He saw a wealthy, professional woman. But then, I tilted my head, the same way I used to when he told me he was proud of my grades. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. He stumbled over his next word. He gripped the podium until his knuckles were white. Is everything all right, dear? My mother whispered, stepping up beside him. He couldn't speak. He just pointed. My mother looked toward me, her eyes squinting. She saw the white suit. She saw the confidence. And then she saw the eyes of the girl she had pushed out of a car in a blizzard. I just raised my glass to them and smiled. My father's speech didn't just falter, it died in his throat. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Because in his mind, he had. The legacy he was bragging about was suddenly standing 50 feet away, breathing and wearing a smile that promised nothing but fire. The silence in the ballroom stretched until it became uncomfortable. Guests began to whisper, glancing between the pale man on stage and the woman in white at the back of the room. My mother was the first to recover, or at least she tried to. She grabbed the microphone with a trembling hand, her fake smile plastered on like cracked porcelain. "Excuse us," she chirped, her voice 2 octaves too high. "My husband hasn't been feeling well. The excitement of the deal, you know? Please, enjoy the music. We'll be back shortly." They practically ran off the stage, heading straight for the private study. I didn't follow them immediately. I let them stew. I let them walk into that room and see the Polaroid I'd left on the chair. I wanted their hearts to hammer against their ribs just like mine did when I was walking that mountain highway alone. When I finally pushed open the heavy oak doors of the study, I found them in a state of pure panic. My father was clutching the Polaroid, his face a sickly shade of gray. My mother was pacing, her silk dress hissing against the floor. "Who are you?" my father barked, though his voice lacked any real authority. "What is this sick joke?" "You always did love a good prank, Dad," I said, closing the door softly behind me. I sat down in the guest chair, crossing my legs with calculated elegance. "Don't tell me you've forgotten your own embarrassment?" My mother gasped, her hand flying to her throat. It can't be. You're dead." "We filed the reports. You went to the city and what? Overdosed? Starved? Froze?" I tilted my head. "I know you were counting on the freeze. It would have made the inheritance transition so much cleaner, wouldn't it? 7 years is a long time to wait for a girl to stay missing. You were so close. Only 3 months to go." "How dare you come into this house?" my father hissed, trying to regain his footing. "You were a mistake then, and you're a trespasser now. I'll have security throw you out. I'll tell everyone you're an imposter trying to shake us down." "You could try," I said, pulling a sleek tablet from my bag. "But the silent partner from the mining firm, the one who's supposed to sign the final acquisition papers in an hour. That's me. I own the consulting firm you've been begging for a meeting with. I've spent 3 years making sure every penny of that deal passes through my fingers before it ever reaches yours." The room went deathly quiet. I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, a sound that reminded me of Silas's workshop. "You're lying," my mother whispered. "The firm is Apex Consulting. It's a multinational. It's a shell, Mom. Just like yours. Only mine has better lawyers." I tapped the tablet screen, and the wall-mounted TV in the study flickered to life. It didn't show stock prices or contract drafts. It showed a live feed of my mother's secret bank account, the one she'd been using to drain my father's funds. My father's eyes widened as he saw the numbers. He turned to his wife, his face contorting with a new kind of rage. "What is this, Diane? You've been stealing from me? I was protecting us," she shrieked. "You were going to blow it all on those investments." "You're both vultures," I interrupted, my voice cutting through their bickering like a blade. "But here's the best part. The document you're supposed to sign tonight? It's not an acquisition of mineral rights. It's a confession of fraud. And if you don't sign it, I release the evidence of the trust fund embezzlement to the feds tonight. I stood up, smoothing my jacket. I'll give you 30 minutes to decide which way you want to lose. Oh, and Dad, don't bother calling security. I hired the firm providing the guards tonight. They work for me now. I walked out, leaving them in a room that suddenly felt very, very small. But as I stepped back into the ballroom, I saw a man standing by the bar. He was wearing a dark suit, watching me with an intensity that made the hair on my neck stand up. It wasn't one of my guards. It was the lawyer from Vanguard and Associates. And he wasn't looking at me with admiration. He was looking at me like I was a problem that needed to be solved. The lawyer, a man named Thompson, didn't move as I approached. He just swirled the ice in his glass, the clinking sound echoing the ticking of the clocks I had grown up listening to in Silas's shop. I realized then that my parents were small fish. They were cruel, yes, but they were amateurs. Thompson and the conglomerates he represented, they were the sharks that ate the world. That was quite a performance in there, Thompson said, his voice smooth as silk and just as dangerous. But you're playing a dangerous game, girl. You think you can hold up a multi-billion-dollar mineral deal because of a childhood grudge? It's not a grudge, Mr. Thompson, I replied, standing my ground. It's a correction. The mountain belongs to me. The rights belong to me, and I'm not selling. He leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing. Everyone has a price, even ghosts. Your daughter Noah. She's at a cabin in the woods, isn't she? Silas is a talented man, but he's old. It would be a shame if something happened to that peaceful little sanctuary. The air left my lungs for a split second. He was threatening my child, the one thing more precious to me than justice. My hand tightened around my clutch, where I kept a small, encrypted transmitter Silas had built for me. If anything happens to them, I whispered, the data I have on your firm's illegal offshore incentives goes live to every major news outlet in the country. I didn't just dig into my parents, Thompson. I dug into you. We stood there in a dead heat, two predators measuring each other. But I had one advantage he didn't know about. I wasn't just a victim. I was the architect of the very contract he was here to witness. 30 minutes, I said, repeating the ultimatum I gave my parents. The meeting is in the library. If you want this deal to move forward in any capacity, you'll be there. And you'll keep your cleaners away from that cabin. I turned my back on him and walked toward the library. My heart was racing, but my mind was clear. I needed to finish this now. When I entered the library, my parents were already there, looking broken. The fire in their eyes had been replaced by the dull realization of total defeat. They had spent 10 years thinking they had won, only to realize they had been living in a house of cards I'd been waiting to blow down. We'll sign, my father said, his voice barely a rasp. Just give us enough to leave. We'll go to the coast. You'll never see us again. You don't get it, do you? I said, spreading the documents across the mahogany table. You don't get to negotiate. You're not leaving with a payout. You're signing over the estate, the shell companies, and the remaining trust assets. In exchange, I don't call the police tonight. My mother began to sob, not out of regret for what she did to me, but for the loss of her jewelry and her status. It was the most pathetic sound I'd ever heard. Sign, I commanded. They picked up the pens. One by one, they scrawled their names on the lines I'd meticulously prepared. With every stroke of ink, a piece of the weight I'd carried for 10 years lifted off my shoulders. I watched as they signed away the life they had stolen from me. But just as my father was finishing the last page, the doors to the library swung open. It wasn't Thompson. It was a man I hadn't seen in a decade, the boy who had been the troubled reason my parents used to justify their shame. The father of my child. He didn't look troubled anymore. He looked like he was part of the plan, and the look he gave my parents told me that the betrayal went even deeper than the mountain itself. The man standing in the doorway was older, his face hardened by time, but I recognized those eyes instantly. He was the one my parents had used as a scapegoat. The bad influence they blamed for my pregnancy before they discarded me. I thought he had vanished into the same darkness I had. "You're late," I said, my voice steady even as my parents gasped in horror. He walked over and stood beside me, tossing a digital drive onto the table next to their signed confessions. "The Vanguard servers are wiped. Thompson's cleaners are currently being detained by local authorities for trespassing on private property near Silas's cabin. Noah is safe." My father looked from him to me, his mouth agape. You've been working with him this whole time?" "Since the day I turned 18, I said. "While you were busy spending my inheritance, we were building a network. He didn't abandon me, Dad. You forced him out of town with threats of jail time. You didn't realize that a man with nothing to lose is the perfect partner for a woman who wants everything back." I picked up the signed documents. The power shift was absolute. 10 years ago, I was a child begging for a coat in a blizzard. Now, I held the deed to their house, the keys to their accounts, and the evidence that could put them away for a long, long time. "Get out," I said. It wasn't a scream. It was a cold, quiet command. "Tonight?" my mother whimpered, looking at her designer heels. "It's raining. Where are we supposed to go?" "There's a mountain highway about 40 miles from here," I replied, a dark smile touching my lips. "I hear the walking is good for the soul. Consider it a prank." A little reality check to see how grown up you really are. I watched from the grand balcony as they were escorted off the property by the security team I owned. They didn't have luggage. They didn't have a car. They walked down the long, winding driveway into the dark, the same way I had walked into the snow a decade ago. The silence that followed was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. A few days later, I sat on the porch of Silas's cabin. Noah was playing in the dirt with a set of old watch gears, and the troubled boy, who had become my strongest ally, was fixing the porch swing. Silas sat in his rocker, a satisfied look on his face. I pulled out the document I had shown my parents, the one that made their faces go pale. It wasn't just a confession. It was a deed of gift. I had officially turned the mountain into a protected nature preserve and a youth sanctuary. The rare earth minerals would stay in the ground. The wealth they had killed for was gone, replaced by something they could never understand. A future that wasn't for sale. They thought I was a stain. They thought I was an embarrassment. But in the end, I was the gear that ground their world to a halt. Justice isn't always about a courtroom. Sometimes, it's about making the people who hurt you feel the exact temperature of the world they left you in. And as I watched the sun set over the mountain, I realized for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't cold anymore. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Whispered Wrongs. It means the world to me and helps keep these stories alive. Now, I have a question for you. Have you ever had someone underestimate you, only for you to prove them completely wrong? Tell me your comeback story in the comments below. I read every single one. If you want to hear another story about a family secret that stayed buried for 20 years, click the video on the left. See you in the next one.